Screencasting, a term referring to video that normally involves screen capture and sometimes has narration on top of that. The purpose of which tends to normally be educational or informative at the very least. It's something I do a lot on this channel, seeing as that I do quite a lot of computing related tutorials. So the question is, how do I do it? Now, I'm not exactly saying the way I do it is the best or correct, but if you're interested in going into screencasting, here are some tips that may be able to help you. More on this after the break. Hello and welcome to another Random Wednesday episode. So let's take screencasting from the top. We're going to start by exploring some of the programs that I use to help me with this, and then we'll move on to actually looking at some of the gear I use, as well as some of the techniques that could make your life easier. So let's start with software, and what I'm about to introduce to you are open source or at least free applications that, well, you can download at no cost. So hopefully this will make your going into screencasting a little bit easier. For generic screen capture, you can use a program like CamStudio. Now, CamStudio is actually pretty dated, and what it means is it does use a little bit of a primitive technique to capture your screen. Of course, that doesn't mean the program is bad, but there are a little bit of issues with the frame rate of the video you've captured. So as an example, if you look at this sample clip, you realize that the motion of my mouse is a little choppy. That is the effect of a low frame rate, and unfortunately CamStudio is sort of limited in that regard. It works a little bit better if you switch off the Windows DWM. In other words, you actually get rid of all the nice transparency effects that is associated with Windows Aero. As you can see, the frame rate is nearly doubled with DWM off, giving smoother and more pleasing screen capture. To toggle DWM on and off, simply hit Start, type in Performance, and click on Adjust the appearance and performance of Windows. Then, uncheck the Enable Desktop Composition checkbox. If this is a problem to you, you may also want to consider Open Broadcaster, or OBS for short. Now, OBS is actually not really intended for screen capture. Its purpose is more along the lines of broadcasting to websites like Twitch and more recently YouTube as well. However, having said that, it actually also performs the task of screen capture very well. And because it is a new application, well, it doesn't have the frame rate issues that CamStudio has. However, the drawback of OBS, especially if you're going to use it only for screen capture, is its setup is significantly more complicated. There are a lot more menus you need to go through, more settings you need to understand. So for the purposes of this particular tutorial, I'm actually going to show you how to use CamStudio. I'll also show you the workaround I use to actually make the low frame rate effect not so apparent. But we'll talk about that when it comes to the editing portion. So let's talk about setting up CamStudio real quick. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there are several things you need to look at. First and most importantly, you want to choose a good codec to actually encode your video. This is very important because if you don't do that, you get an uncompressed video and its file size is going to be huge. At the same time, I don't want to go too much into detail because I will probably be talking about this in a separate video later on. So suffice to say this. The codec I like to use is X264VFW, and you can find a link to that in the video description. It's free as well, and it actually requires a little bit of setup, but you will be able to find the settings I use in the video description as well. So yeah, I'll link you to an image that is a screenshot of all my settings. On top of that, there are also some things you should configure. For example, whether CamStudio captures the entire screen or a particular region. I for one always capture the entire screen. If I want to zoom things up, I'll do that in my video editing program. If you restrict yourself at this point, then essentially you have video footage that is stuck with that. That's not saying a small region capture is bad in any way. If your video editor doesn't allow you to actually, resize or reposition clips later on, then doing that works as well. The only slight drawback to this is that you have to set something that works because you don't have the freedom to change it later. Some other settings include whether or not you want to capture sound, whether or not you want to capture your cursor, which most of the time, yes, you should. But yeah, apart from that, you're good to go. You can hit the giant record button, or you can press F8 on your keyboard, and the recording will begin. When you're done, press F9 or the stop button in CamStudio, and you'll be prompted to save the file. Now, be very careful to not actually close out of this dialog box, because if you do, then your recording is gone. Now, on top of CamStudio, another program that I like to use is Audacity. Audacity is actually an audio editing program. You can also use it to record your audio, which incidentally I am using right now to record this audio you're hearing. I will also be using it later on to actually clean up this audio and make it sound a little bit better. So yeah, you probably want to look into Audacity as well to record and edit your audio. So alright, now that we have all the software down, let's move on to take a look at some gear that I personally use that just helps enhance the quality of my screencasts. Since the last thing we talked about was audio, let's look at that first. I actually have a condenser mic, which, has sort of pretty good sound. If you are seriously going into screencasting and you want people to, have less trouble understanding you, getting a good mic would be helpful. I'm not saying it's extremely important. Any old headset mic that, doesn't distort your voice too bad would probably work. But if you're interested in investing in something that, produces slightly better quality sound, you might want to look at a condenser mic. If you're interested to learn more about the one I use, well, I've reviewed it a couple of times now. So yeah, you can click on the annotation link on screen. Now the next thing we're looking at is completely optional, but I use it and I love it because it allows me to use my screen as a whiteboard. And this is extremely useful to, annotate the stuff you're doing or just to drive in your points better. So yeah, this tool is a graphics tablet. I currently have a Wacom Bamboo Pen and Touch, and I've reviewed that before, so once again, annotation link on screen. If you're interested in doing the whole whiteboardy thing, like I'm doing right now, then you might want to consider doing this as well. The software I'm using to perform all the inking operations is called Windows Jarnal. It is included in Windows Vista and Windows 7. I'm not entirely sure about Windows 8, so you might have to look that up. On earlier versions of Windows, if you have a tablet PC version of the OS, then you have Windows Jarnal as well. If you are not running Windows or you don't want to use Windows Jarnal for some reason, you can also take a look at an alternative called Jarnal, which, does more or less the same thing, except that program is written in Java, so it should run on basically any computer. So alright, what we have just done is we have basically set up all the things you need to get started. Let's now actually talk about getting started. Now here's the deal. If this is the first time you're starting on a video project like this, it could get pretty daunting. It is even more scary to think about the fact that you have to do so many things at once, in particular the video and the audio aspects. But really, you don't have to. You see, it's always easier to have one thing first and then building the other on top of that. What do I mean by this? Whenever I do a lot of my videos that are primarily screencasting, what I do is I write out a script first. Then I record myself reading out the entire script. At the end of the day, I have an audio file, which essentially is the entire contents of the script and is the final narration you will hear for the video. Only then do I actually move on to capture all my screen footage. So what this means is we have audio and we're building the video on top of it. I feel it's harder to, get too far lost when you're doing things this way because, well, you have the audio track that is there to guide you. Of course, that's not to say that you absolutely do not touch the audio track. If you feel the pacing is off or if you feel you need more time, you can of course chop up the audio track later on to, just add some space. You could do things the other way around. If you feel that you want your video to determine the pacing instead, then capture all the video first. Then do your narration on top of that. My point here is, if you're trying to do video capture and narration at the same time, it becomes a more daunting task. And you don't have to do things this way, especially if you're not comfortable with the idea. Since the audio is already there, you can even, go ahead and do multiple takes of the video and pick the one you like the best. In fact, you don't even have to do that. What I do when I do my video capture is basically, of course, I listen to the audio and I find out what I want to do at that point, and then I go ahead and perform the action. without worrying about whether the pace of my video will match the pace of my audio. Later on in my video editor, I can actually tweak the speed of my video clips. What this means is if I have a long action in my video clip, but the corresponding audio is pretty short, I can speed up that clip so that now the two things match. It might sound a little unnatural at first, but the fact that you only spoke for a short while to describe this action probably means that the action isn't very complex, and speeding it up will not make it too hard to follow. Of course, this isn't, perfectly true every single time. If you have to, go ahead and cut up your audio to add a little space. By the way, I mentioned earlier that CamStudio has a low frame rate problem. This is how you work around it. If you have a low frame rate clip, but you speed it up, the low frame rate feeling goes away, because of course, essentially, you've filled up the gaps. Of course, if you intend to use this trick, don't forget that the actual speed of the clip will change. The way I work around this is when I'm capturing the original clip, I move my mouse slowly. This also gives you the added advantage of, having something that you can use to stall for time if you have to. Speaking of stalling for time, I have another little trick for you. Let's say what I want to do now is action A followed by action B. The whole idea is in the audio I describe action A first, then I transition into describing action B. Then I capture the video footage, which looks something like this. Essentially, I do action A first, I leave a short break, and then I do action B. However, in my video editor, I realized that the audio is far longer. What I can do is, essentially, I can cut out that little break and duplicate it several times over. Obviously, in that little break, nothing should be happening on screen, otherwise you'll see the same changes happen over and over again. But essentially, if everything is still, then what you can do is you can pad out that time by duplicating the break several times over. Your objective to doing so is to actually just hold the video back until the audio starts talking about action B, in which then you begin with the video clip for action B. So yeah, that's the idea. You can duplicate a little break to fill up more time in your video if required. So that's it, that's basically it. This video has been all over the place, I'm so sorry for that. I did try to break this video down into like software and gear and then, actual editing tricks, but I guess that kinda didn't work out. But at any rate, I hope this video helped you, in particular the tips at the end. Hopefully that will help you in organizing, just your entire shoot and planning out your editing well. But yes, that is all for this particular video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, you're watching 0612 TV. Hello! If you enjoyed this video, don't forget I appreciate every like, favorite, and comment you give me. If you'd like to see more from me in the future, don't forget to subscribe. For more updates outside of YouTube, do follow my official Twitter account at 0612 TV. And if you'd like to see more of my work, you can also check out my About Me page. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, you're watching 0612 TV.